What would you do if stopping to help a stranger in the middle of a hurricane meant losing your job, but saving a life? For Teddy Portman, that split-second decision would unleash a chain of events no one could have seen coming, including a military convoy showing up at his doorstep. The wind howled like a beast outside the cracked windshield, rattling the wipers and sending branches skittering across the deserted road. Teddy Portman gripped the steering wheel tighter against the leather. Sheets of rain lashed against the glass, blurring his vision, and every crack of thunder felt like it was aimed straight at him. His delivery van was barely holding together, an old clunker the company refused to retire. The heater was busted, one headlight flickered like a dying firefly, and now, with Hurricane Donovan ripping through the coast, even the GPS had given up, blinking weakly as if to say you're on your own, pal. But Teddy couldn't turn back. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "I'll be fine, baby. Don't you worry about me." But she wasn't fine. Valerie Portman was lying in a hospital bed 3 towns over, fighting pneumonia with one working lung and a pile of medical bills no one could pay. And this package, one stupid, last-minute delivery for a client up in Milltown, would earn him the bonus he needed to cover her next treatment. Miss it, and he might as well sign her discharge papers himself. A green road sign bent sideways in the wind, its reflective letters barely readable. Milltown, 7 miles. He cursed under his breath and pressed the accelerator. The van protested but obeyed. That's when he saw it. A flicker of red tail light in the ditch. No, not just a tail light. An entire pickup truck lay upside down, half submerged in floodwater, its undercarriage exposed like a stranded beetle. The driver's side window was shattered, and through the curtain of rain, Teddy could just make out a hand, feebly slapping against the glass. God damn it. His foot hovered over the brake. His brain screamed at him, Don't do this. Keep driving. One more delay and you lose the job. You lose the bonus. You lose your mom." But his hands had already turned the wheel. The van skidded to a halt in the mud, headlights cutting through the rain. Teddy jumped out, instantly drenched, his sneakers sinking into the waterlogged earth. "Hey, you in there? Can you hear me?" he shouted over the roar of the storm. The hand moved weakly. A muffled voice called out, thick with pain. "I'm coming, hold on." Teddy waded to the cab and yanked at the door. It was jammed, the metal twisted by the crash. He braced a foot against the frame and pulled harder, rain blinding his eyes. On the 3rd try, it gave way with a screech. Inside, 2 men. The driver was unconscious, blood matting his hair. The passenger, an older man with a gash above his brow, blinked up at Teddy, his face pale and rain-speckled. "Can you move?" Teddy shouted. The older man groaned. "Get him first." "No time." Teddy grabbed the nearest arm, the passenger, and hauled him free, dragging him toward the van. The man coughed, clutching his ribs but alive. Without hesitation, Teddy doubled back, wrestling the driver's limp body from the wreck. He was heavier than he looked, and the floodwater made every step a fight. By the time Teddy reached the van with the second man, his muscles burned, and his lungs screamed for air. The older man was already trying to stand. "Easy, old-timer. You're bleeding," Teddy muttered, pushing both men into the van's back seat. "Name's Wellington," the man rasped, spitting blood. "General Isaac Wellington." Teddy blinked. "A general? Like, actual army general?" "Yeah," Wellington coughed. "And if you don't start that engine, son, none of us are gonna live long enough to tell the story." Teddy didn't need telling twice. He slammed the door shut, fired up the engine, and peeled out onto the flooded road. The wheels fought for traction, fishtailing dangerously, but he kept them steady. A mile down the road, his phone buzzed. He fumbled it from his pocket, glancing at the screen. Martin Lennon, supervisor. Teddy's stomach sank. He answered. "Portman." The voice on the other end barked. "Where the hell are you?" "I had to stop, man. There was a crash. People trapped. I don't care if it was the president himself. You were told no delays. This storm's no excuse. You're fired. Effective immediately. Turn in the van when the storm clears." The line went dead. Teddy stared at the screen, disbelief and fury crashing over him like the rain. "Problem?" General Wellington asked from the back. "Yeah," Teddy muttered. "I just lost my job." A beat of silence. Then the general reached into his soaked jacket and pulled out a weathered business card, pressing it into Teddy's palm. "Hold on to that," Wellington said. "You'll be hearing from me." Teddy glanced at the card, but the ink was already blurring in the rain. He looked up, but the man's gaze was steady, storm or no storm. A moment later, headlights cut through the darkness as a military Humvee appeared ahead, soldiers waving them down. "Convoy's here," Wellington said, his voice rough but certain. "You're clear now, son. Drive safe." Teddy nodded, throat tight, and pulled the van off the road as the soldiers took over. By the time he looked down at the business card again, the general was gone, and the storm felt a little less heavy. The morning light pushed through the blinds of Teddy's small apartment, slicing thin stripes of gold across the cluttered kitchen counter. An untouched cup of coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten amid the storm that had upended his life. Teddy sat at the table, his phone face down, his mother's medical bills fanned out before him like a losing hand in a high-stakes game. His stomach still knotted from the night before. The overturned truck, the drenched figures in the rain, the callous voice of his boss firing him through static and wind. A knock at the door broke the silence. He frowned. Nobody came by this early, and certainly not in a black government-issued sedan parked outside his building. Teddy opened the door to find a tall, broad-shouldered man in military dress blues. The insignia gleamed on his chest, and though his posture was sharp, his face carried the ease of someone used to giving orders that stuck. "Mr. Theodore Portman?" the man asked. Teddy nodded cautiously. "Yeah. Who's asking?" The officer smiled faintly. "General Marcus Wellington requests your company for breakfast. Transportation's waiting." Teddy blinked, thrown off balance. The man from the truck. He hesitated for a beat, then grabbed his jacket and followed. The drive to the base was quiet. The sedan cut through the remnants of the storm, weaving past fallen branches and debris. Teddy's thoughts raced faster than the car. What the hell does a general want with me? They arrived at a modest military dining hall, far from the imposing headquarters Teddy had imagined. Inside, General Wellington sat alone at a table by the window, a plate of eggs and toast before him, untouched. "Teddy," the general called out, standing to greet him with a handshake firm enough to anchor a man in place. "Sit. You eat." Teddy gave a tight nod and lowered himself into the chair opposite. "I owe you my life," Wellington began without preamble. "Most men would have kept driving. You didn't." Teddy shrugged, uncomfortable under the weight of the gratitude. "Couldn't just leave you out there. Didn't know who you were. Exactly why it matters." The general leaned forward. "I'm not the type to forget things like that. Which brings me to why you're here." He slid a crisp folder across the table. Teddy hesitated, then opened it. Inside were papers stamped with official seals, a government ID badge with his photo already printed, and a list of benefits that made his head swim. Steady salary, health insurance, full coverage, housing allowance, even a retirement plan. "You're offering me a job?" Teddy asked, disbelieving. "Military logistics. Specialized transport unit," Wellington confirmed. "Drivers we can trust in bad conditions, tough situations. People who won't freeze up when it matters." Teddy's eyes lingered on the page, the numbers looking almost fictional next to the unpaid bills still waiting on his kitchen table. "I don't get it," Teddy admitted. "Is this because I pulled you out of a wreck? Some pity reward?" Wellington's brow furrowed. "Son, don't insult yourself like that." He leaned back in his chair, studying Teddy carefully. "This isn't charity. You've got grit, good instincts under pressure. And people like you, the ones who don't hesitate when the sky's falling, they're rare. I could spend 6 months trying to recruit a dozen drivers and not find one I'd trust to make a call like you did last night." Teddy swallowed hard, the war between pride and need rising in his throat. The offer was everything he'd ever wanted, but his stomach twisted at the thought of being the guy who got handed a position because he got lucky. "I don't know if I'm good enough for this," Teddy said quietly. Wellington's gaze softened. "I didn't ask for a saint. I asked for a driver with guts. That's you. The general slid the folder back toward Teddy. I'm not gonna push you. You're free to say no. But understand something, life doesn't hand out clean chances. It hands out storms, wrecks, and bad timing. What matters is what you do when you're in the middle of one. Teddy stared down at the paperwork, the weight of it settling in his hands. A chance at steady work, a chance to fix what had gone wrong, to get his mother treatment before it was too late. He looked back up at Wellington. When would it start? Noon today, the general said with a half-smile. If you're in. Teddy hesitated for one last breath, then gave a single nod. Yeah, I'm in. Wellington extended his hand again, and this time, Teddy took it with a firmer grip. Good man, the general said. You won't regret it. As they stood to leave, Teddy felt something he hadn't in months, a sliver of solid ground beneath his feet. And this time he wasn't running from a storm. He was driving straight into one. The sun beat down on the asphalt parade ground as Teddy gripped the wheel of the tactical transport vehicle, his knuckles white against the worn leather. Sweat trickled down the side of his face, but his focus didn't waver. Ahead of him, a sergeant waved his arm in a sharp, slicing motion. Hard left, Portman. Thread the gap. Teddy spun the wheel, feeling the massive vehicle sway beneath him as it squeezed between two concrete barriers, the tires spitting gravel. The rumble of the engine drowned out his thudding heartbeat. By the time he brought the truck to a stop at the checkpoint, his shirt was clinging to his back. A low whistle cut through the air. Not bad, rookie, one of the instructors muttered. Most guys clip a barrier their first week. Teddy let out a breath and wiped his forehead. It had been 3 days since he'd accepted the job, and every hour since had been a test. Obstacle courses, emergency protocols, field repair drills, and hours behind the wheel of military rigs he'd never even seen in person before. His muscles ached. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but for the first time in months, the exhaustion felt like something he'd earned. As he climbed down from the cab, a familiar voice called his name. Teddy! He turned to find Corporal Diaz jogging toward him, a sheet of paper in his hand. Diaz had taken to Teddy quickly, the kind of guy who always had a joke ready and a bad story to top any good one. Wellington wants to see you in the comms building, Diaz said, handing over the note. Now. Teddy's stomach dropped. In his limited experience, General wants to see you was never a phrase delivered with good news. When Teddy arrived, the small room was crowded with men in uniform and a single civilian, a wiry man in a rumpled suit, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. General Wellington stood at the center of the room, arms crossed. His eyes were hard as stone. Mr. Lowell, the general said coldly, addressing the man in the suit. This isn't the kind of apology you mail in and hope disappears. Lowell cleared his throat. General Wellington, I can assure you, our company deeply regrets. Save it. Wellington cut him off. He gestured toward a monitor on the wall, where a paused video frame showed a delivery truck half submerged in stormwater, headlights cutting through the rain. The timestamp from the night of the hurricane glowed in the corner. Wellington turned to the gathered officers and a few civilian witnesses. This man, he said, pointing at Teddy, risked his life to pull me and my driver out of a wreck during a Category 3 hurricane. While doing so, he was terminated from his position via phone call. Fired while actively saving lives. A low murmur rippled through the room. Teddy felt his face flush, not from embarrassment but from the raw exposure. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted it. Your company, Wellington continued, glaring at Lowell, owes him more than a severance check and a form letter. You owe him his name back. You owe him decency. Lowell stammered, pulling a manila envelope from his briefcase. We've prepared a formal apology and financial settlement as a gesture of goodwill. He held it out toward Teddy, who didn't move. The room was silent as every eye fixed on him. After a long moment, Teddy stepped forward, took the envelope, and calmly set it on the table beside him without opening it. I don't need your money, Teddy said quietly, his voice steady. What I needed was a job, a little respect, maybe someone to call back when I told them my mom was sick. Lowell's face reddened, but he said nothing. Wellington gave a small nod of approval. Dismissed. Lowell scuttled from the room like a man avoiding shrapnel. Wellington approached Teddy, clapping a hand on his shoulder. You didn't have to say a word, but I'm glad you did. Teddy met the older man's gaze. I didn't do this to make noise. I know. That's what makes it worth hearing. That night, back in his barracks room, Teddy sat alone with the unopened envelope. Inside, he knew, was a check large enough to cover a few hospital bills, maybe clear some debts. But it wasn't what gnawed at him. His phone buzzed, and he grabbed it, his chest tightening at the name on the screen. Mom. He answered quickly. Hey, Ma. Her voice was weaker than usual, thinner, like a wire stretched too tight. Baby, I had a bad day, she said, words halting. They're talking about moving me. Some new ward. I didn't want to call. But Teddy closed his eyes, guilt washing over him like a wave. I'm working on it, Ma. I swear, things are changing. Just hold on a little longer. She tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough. You always did think you could move mountains, Teddy. I'm not moving mountains, he whispered. I'm just driving the damn truck. When the call ended, Teddy set the phone down carefully. Across the room, the military ID badge sat on his desk. The rumors had started circulating that afternoon: special transport missions, dangerous runs in hostile zones. High risk, high reward. He knew his name was on a list, and he knew what it meant if he said yes. For his mother, for himself. He wasn't sure which terrified him more. The sun hung high over the base, casting clean shadows across the parade ground. Rows of soldiers in pressed uniforms stood at attention, the sharp gleam of metals catching the light. A brass band's final notes lingered in the air as the ceremony drew to a close. Among the assembled ranks, Teddy Portman stood straighter than he ever had in his life. His uniform was crisp, a silver badge gleaming on his chest. 3 months of relentless training, long nights, and harder decisions had carved something new into him. The exhaustion was still there, but so was something else: pride, earned not given. At his side, General Wellington stepped forward to the podium. He didn't speak from a script. He didn't need to. Some of you came here by choice, Wellington began, his voice low but carrying. Some were called by duty, and some arrived because life left them nowhere else to go. Teddy felt the words settle over him like a weight, because they were his story too. But it's what you give when no one's watching that defines a man. And the world. Wellington's gaze swept the crowd, then landed briefly on Teddy. The world eventually repays what you give. A quiet murmur ran through the audience, like a sigh of relief and understanding. Wellington gave a final nod and stepped away from the microphone. As the crowd dispersed, Teddy was approached by Corporal Diaz, grinning as usual, an envelope in his hand. Mail run, Diaz said, handing it over. Came through the civvy line. Some fancy company stationery. Teddy frowned, breaking the seal. Inside was a letter bearing the familiar letterhead of his old delivery company. Mr. Theodore Portman, we deeply regret the circumstances surrounding your departure from our organization. In light of recent events and your distinguished service, we would like to formally offer you reinstatement to your previous position, effective immediately, with an increase in salary and full benefits. We believe everyone deserves a second chance. Sincerely, Thomas Lowell, Regional Director. Teddy read it twice, then let the paper fall to his side. He didn't feel the anger he'd expected. No bitterness, no satisfaction. Just a strange, quiet detachment, as if the person they were writing to was someone he barely remembered. A small metal waste bin stood nearby, the faint scent of burnt paper still lingering from someone's discarded cigarette carton. Without a word, Teddy crumpled the letter, lit a match from his pocket, and dropped the burning wad into the bin. The flames took it in seconds. Guess that's a no, huh? Diaz asked, watching the paper curl into ash. Teddy gave a faint, crooked smile. I'm not driving their trucks anymore. Later that afternoon, as he packed up his gear for the weekend, a knock came at his door. Portman, a soldier called, holding out a sealed orders envelope. "You're on assignment." Teddy took the envelope and tore it open. Inside, the brief read, "Emergency medical supply transport, Region Red Zone Beta. Departure, 5 o'clock. High-risk humanitarian deployment. Casualty reports ongoing. Authorized for full logistical support." Teddy exhaled slowly, the weight of it sinking in. Another mission, another road. But this time, he wasn't the guy chasing paychecks or dodging storms for a company that never learned his name. He was Teddy Portman, logistics officer, U.S. military. He tucked the orders into his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and stepped out into the dying light of the afternoon. His mother was safe. He had a purpose. And the road ahead, no matter how dangerous, belonged to him now. The story wasn't over. Not yet. And he was ready. This story reminds us that one brave choice can rewrite your entire future. If you were in Teddy's shoes, would you have stopped in that storm? Tell us in the comments. And if this story moved you, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that hit where it matters.